Hi, and welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the calendar's astrologers, along with Lonnie Demetrius. This is part of our musician series of portraits, and these are meant to be educational. I point out how we are interpreting, because after all, one of the hardest parts of astrology is interpreting the charts. This one is Carla Bruni Zarkozy. She was born on December 23rd, 1967 at 6:10 p.m. CET in Turin, Italy. And yet she's known for being French, but her family actually moved from Turin to France when she was 7 years old. She is born with the sun at 1 degree Capricorn. She's born with Cancer rising, so she's a seventh house native. And she's born with the moon in Virgo. Now, one of the things that's real interesting about her chart is it's very feminine. The sun, the moon, and the rising are all in feminine signs. The moon is kind of what you consider one of the leading planets. It's one of the first planets you see from the rising. But in truth, before that, what you see is Jupiter in Virgo. This is the first visible planet as you go below the horizon, you might say. The Jupiter is at 5 degrees Virgo. The moon is at 21 degrees Virgo. Pluto is at 22 degrees Virgo. Pallas Athena, the warrior goddess, is at 29 degrees Virgo. And Uranus, the planet of excitement and sizzle, is also at 29 degrees Virgo. Virgo is the quintessential woman. And what's interesting is that starting with Pluto, all of these, Pluto, Pallas Athena, and Uranus, are all in the part of the sky where you're in the stars of Virgo as well. It's where sidereal Virgo overlaps tropical Virgo. So it's a very feminine part of the sky. It's iconic female with the warrior goddess. The warrior goddess is Pallas Athena, is something you find in the charts of models. And she was one of the top 20 most highly paid models in the world for about a period of she worked as a model for about 10 years. Having Uranus conjunct it adds great amounts of sizzle. Pluto there adds global significance, a global connection. The moon being there means it's emotional to her. The fact that Jupiter is leading the moon, it wouldn't be considered a classic conjunction, because after all it's 5 degrees to 21 degrees, except for the fact that, remember, the moon has a larger influence than most planets. So does Jupiter. She was born into wealth. First of all, her father was a well-known Italian industrialist. Her mother was a very well-known singer, I believe an opera singer, classically trained. Her genetic father, which was revealed many years later, is a famous guitarist. Her father, who was an industrialist, was also a composer of classical music. So even though she started her career as a model, music was in her blood. And she later on after she had stopped modeling, she started writing lyrics, sent lyrics to a well-known singer who then incorporated that into a song that went on to one of his albums. And she moved on from there and actually came out with a number of albums, became a tremendously successful French musician. What's interesting about the chart is that so much of the chart is actually below the horizon. Okay, so basically you look at where the ascendant descendant is from 19 degrees Cancer over to 19 degrees Capricorn. Remember, her sun is, at 1 degree Capricorn at what they call a cardinal point. And those cardinal points, the 90-degree points, first degree of Aries, first degree of Cancer, first degree of Capricorn, first degree of Libra, didn't out of order there, sorry, have a lot of leverage. And so she's born at this point of a lot of leverage, but in the 7th house, it's all about her partnerships for her. She's not an initiator, but all these planets, the stellium as you call it, 4 planets and an asteroid in the 3rd house, is the house of the kid, of the sibling, someone's child. Additionally, what's above the horizon in the 8th house is Mars. She has Mars in Aquarius. In the 8th house, Mars in its own house Interesting, but it's an Aquarius, not a especially strong sign from Mars, but it's strong by position. It's very important. Whenever you find a planet in a house that it rules, that is very powerful. It's something that we many times don't credit, but it means that the planet can act in areas in which it has power. It may not have the strongest sign, but I tell you the truth, I think it oftentimes acts as if it does, because it's acting in its own territory. Okay? So Mars in the 8th house is very powerful. It's in Aquarius. Aquarius is the shepherd, and it's the one that deals with, if you think of a flock of sheep, that's kind of like chaos. And the shepherd is about controlling chaos. Mars in the 8th house, 8th house is about shared resources, about managing shared resources. You have Mars there. She's very good at aggressively controlling shared chaotic situations. Interesting. Definitely someone who grew up maybe in a big industrial family or a big artistic industrial family, as a kid. Above, the only other planet above the horizon, remember everything else is below, in her personal life, a very rich personal life, is Saturn in Aries. This is a fall position, so it's a dignity. Remember these, the misogynistic approach to the dignities is to say that, the internal positions are the weak positions. They're personal, they're weak, they're almost, it's almost ascribed to being feminine. They're not weak. They're the personal life. There's the social life and there's the personal life. They have to balance. So much of astrology for so long was geared to what's going to happen in the outer world. And yet, from the beginning of the 20th century, when we started to focus on personal charts, on the individual charts, so much of that actually has to do with the person's internal experience, which is why in this country, most of the astrologers are women. I would say probably 80% of the professional astrologers are probably women, maybe more, come to think of it. You go to an astrology conference, there's a lot of women there. There's a lot fewer men because it's so much about the personal life. So this personal life is very, very rich. This outer world, she has certain expressions. Mars in the 8th house in Aquarius. Now you already have this strong feminine energy here, but it's mercurial in the 3rd house with all the stuff in Virgo, okay? You've got Mars in a very potent position in Aquarius. Aquarius is Mercury's exalted position. So once again, there's a quickness to it. There's a ability to reproduce information. It's kind of the quintessential female. And the Pallas Athena's there, this warrior goddess, she seems unattainable in a certain way, is there. And then Saturn in its detriment position, its internal position, but its best friend position. Saturn in Aries means that it's the best friend of who? Aries. Mars. Okay? The best friend of Mars. So she has this natural affinity in Saturn of Aries of dealing well with men as kind of a colleague, as a friend. It's not a colleague, but really a friend. A colleague is in the outer world. A friend is the inner world, a confidant. In the 10th house, there's something about her work and her career that people feel like they can relate to her. And that's where this gets really interesting. You have basically the strong Mars in the 8th house. You have this strong Jupiter conjunct the moon, okay, the stellium in the 3rd house. You've got Saturn in, this internal position as well. Where's Venus? She's a woman. She's an artist. She's a model. What's Venus doing? Venus is in the 5th house in Scorpio. The 5th house of passion and love and romance. In Scorpio, a very, very sexy position. Conjunct Neptune, the imagination. It brings it once again to this global picture. She has all these different places where Pallas Athena between Pluto and Uranus, global. Venus conjunct Neptune, global. There's all these things that incline to make her famous. Venus in Scorpio, though, what position is that? That's opposite Taurus. Taurus is the ruling position, the external position. Venus is what's called the detriment position, the internal position. It's in the feminine sign, so it's internal responsive. It's a very sexy position that's very responsive to others. Okay? It's responsive to other people. Keep in mind, too, that when we view the dignities, most charts of dignities will say, well, the sun is ruled by Cancer. The sun is ruled by Leo. The moon is ruled by Cancer. And then And then all the other planets get 2 rulers and 2 detriments and But for some reason, the sun and the moon get shortchanged. That's a relatively recent manifestation. If you go back to the most ancient texts, they had dual rulers as well. And the sun was ruled by Leo and Cancer, both, which means that the internal positions are Libra for opposite, not Libra, Aquarius, the sun in Aquarius, and opposite Cancer, the sun in Capricorn. So in other words, the internal positions are in the deep winter, Capricorn and Aquarius. Okay? The exalted position for the sun is Aries. The fall position is Libra. And as we know, Libra is always, everyone's best friend. They're always the connector between everyone. If you look at any movie cast, right, you could swear there's always going to be one Libra there, because that Libra has to be the person who kind of acts as the glue to keep everyone else balanced. And they're beautiful. Librans are very attractive people generally. They're very balanced, but they're also the glue because their ego is not out in front like it would be with the Aries or with the Leo. It got sublimated for the needs of the partnerships. Libra. So in this situation, the sun is in an internal position. The Saturn is in an introvert internal position. The Venus is in an introvert position. Okay? Jupiter's not dignified. The moon's not dignified. And Mars is not dignified, though Mars is very strong. What this does is when a person has this many introvert positions, it makes them very relatable. It makes them feel vulnerable. You see, we admire when people are out there in the world, right? And they're able to accomplish a great deal. But it's when they tell you about the particular challenges they've dealt with, or you read something about challenges they're dealing with, that we've had ourselves, that's when we relate to them. We relate to them through our personal side. That's part of the connection. Someone like Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, all of his planets were in internalized positions, except for one, which is Jupiter. Jupiter was in Pisces, which is actually the what you'd call the feminine ruler, or the extrovert, external, responsive position. It's a sign of a position of great compassion. It's one of the reasons why people liked him. They could see all of his frailties. His internal process was there for everyone to see. They like that about him. There's a certain number of great actresses and actors who are like that. They have a whole group of planets on that detriment side. It makes them relatable. There's things about her performance as a musician, even her work as a model. She was able to show her vulnerabilities. It wasn't about her courage, but her vulnerabilities that makes her so appealing. It's very, very interesting. And the fact that the sun is so powerful in the 7th house, the sun is in the 7th house. Now, realize it's the internal position. It's a responsive position. It's feminine, so it's responsive. It's not dynamic, right? In the 7th house. Her name is Carla Bruni Zarkozy. She was married to the Prime Minister of France. Now, it's really funny. When I look at their 2 charts together, I would not pair these 2 charts up and say, oh, this is like the ideal couple. No, maybe there's other things that other astrologers would see. It wasn't there for me. I did not see this. I think that the Saturn at the midheaven, actually it's just outside the midheaven, it's in the 10th house, the highly elevated Saturn she really seeks out a strong authority figure in her life, because Saturn's in an Aries sign. As an Aries, it's a masculine sign. It would tend to be a strong man in her life. It would have been her father early on, and she would have sought someone like that to kind of give her life structure. Because the sun's in the seventh house, the partnership, creating that partnership with someone who was socially significant, was very important to her. The moon in the third house, well, the third house is how we relate to our close intimates. Those first three houses, first, second, and third, it's really our very close intimates. How we, third house is about the siblings. There was the whole issue that we call them the COVID kids who were being brought up at the time when they couldn't play with other children. A lot of them are behind in their language skills. Why? Because children learn to speak from other kids. The kids just a little older than them. They don't learn from adults. We speak in complete sentences. Kids don't learn in complete sentences. They learn in words and in small phrases, and they learn from the kids just older than them. So you have all these kids who were born during COVID who are very behind in these language skills because they just didn't have they had 2 years of missing this opportunity. Doesn't mean they're not bright, doesn't mean they're not talented. It just, they have to learn that skill set now. That third house, her relationship to siblings, and she has siblings and people who are musicians and actors. Her relationship with them was very, very rich. It may have been that the parents were both very busy with their careers, so the kids' connections were very, very strong. And her desire with all this Virgo, she's someone who likes to help other people. So she would find a partner whom she could help, that she could be a help to. And so someone who's the leader of the country, she's been the most famous model, she's been a very well-known musician, marrying someone who is significant, who she could help, really fit into her program. And the sun, the part of fortune in the fourth house where she would make her money, ultimately, in Libra, in the arts, in the fourth house, a feminine house, conjunct the South Node and Ceres, managing a household. So her ability to manage his household, to raise children, this was significant for her. It's amazing to have a person whose career was so stellar, and yet their real focus is their partnership in their home. All the other stuff was just stuff they did on the way. It's interesting. It's funny, she was the First Lady of France, the Prime Minister's wife, at the same time that Barack Obama and Michelle Obama were in the White House. And that's interesting because both Michelle and Carla are Capricorns. Now, Carla is born at the first degree of Capricorn, but Michelle was born at the 26th degree. So she was in the Capricorn. Remember I mentioned earlier how, when you have the stars underlying it are part of the constellation. She was born with the stars of Capricorn underlying her sun. She is the quintessential Capricorn. This is a woman who grew up on the south side of Chicago to, very much a working class family, and became a very successful attorney, and I think then the provost of a college or university, went to Princeton, did law school, and all this on scholarships because of excellence. Or not all scholarship, quite a bit of, I remember Barack and Michelle talking about the fact that they were finally paying off their student debt. I mean, talented, hardworking people. And that's not to say that because of Carla's family's wealth, so much was handed to her, but it's a very, very different programming. She was born with the stars of Sagittarius underlying her chart, and Jupiter as being the first visible planet as you go around the chart. Her family's connections, her success, her assumption that she's going to be financially okay was part of her early childhood. Saturn is elevated, Saturn in Aries. She was not, Saturn is about success, but it's in Aries. her success, she felt, was going to be her personal success. Her inner growth. The fact that she was so successful externally was kind of probably a surprise to her. But it's a very interesting chart, and the fact that she went into music, from being a model. So many times you say, oh, well, she was a model, and she just had to walk into music. No, remember, all of her parents were musicians and composers. This is stuff that was in her blood. This was something that, she understood. Though her real talent was as a person who wrote lyrics. Jupiter, the moon, Pluto, Pallas, Uranus, in the third house of writing in a Mercury-ruled sign coming from the emotions, the moon. Because the second house, the area of the great voice, she has Leo there. She has a lovely voice, but she did not get her mother's voice. She's not an opera singer. She didn't get that particular gift. She's got Venus in the fifth house, in the area of creativity. She has a very sexy voice, but she doesn't have a voice like Adele, or Sarah Bareilles, or Cher, with these big, powerful voices. Her approach is very French. It's all about the words and the thoughts and the ideas. She's the quintessential French woman born in Italy. So that's the chart for Carla Bruni Zarkozy. Really interesting. It's an interesting transition as we're starting to wrap up the musician series. I hope you found it enjoyable. Remember, you find these every Tuesday at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube. You find our forecast from the planetary calendar every Friday. We do it for the coming week. We use the little cells in the calendar. We are now, we always have the calendars for sale. At this point, we're just getting the shipment for the 2023s. We're very excited about, with the picture from the International Space Station looking down on Earth to remind us that, we are here and we're subject to all these vibrations coming from space. So I hope you found that interesting. And until next time, be well.